I'd been with the company for 27 years. Let me say that again, 27 years. It's the kind of number that sounds almost ridiculous when it comes out of your mouth. Entire generations grow up in less time than that. My son went from a toddler clutching my leg to a grown man with his own apartment in that same span. And every weekday morning, I walked through the same glass doors, tapped my ID on the same scanner, and exchanged the same nod with Carl, the security guard who always smelled faintly of peppermint gum. The days had a rhythm to them, not exciting, not thrilling, but steady. I'd grab my coffee from the break room. That same chipped ceramic mug I kept on the top shelf so no one else would accidentally use it. A splash of milk, 2 sugars. I'd walk to my desk, pass by the humming copier, and listen to the faint clatter of keyboards as people settled in. There was something oddly comforting about the predictability, like a song you've heard so many times you don't even need to hum it. It just plays in your head on its own. I'd started counting down the days to retirement, not out loud, not on some big calendar with red X's, but in my head. 11 more mornings of coffee, 11 more Monday meetings, 11 more afternoons staring at that flickering fluorescent light above my desk, and then freedom. And of course, the retirement bonus I'd been working toward all these years. Not a life-changing sum, but enough to make things easier. Enough to maybe take that trip to Italy my wife and I had been talking about for years, or finally replace the faded carpet in the living room in my mind. I'd already pictured the last day, a small gathering in the break room, maybe a sheet, cake with too much frosting, and one of those oversized cards where everyone scribbles their names. My boss giving a short speech. Probably something about loyalty and dedication, even though we both knew they hadn't really paid attention to my work in years. I'd smile, maybe crack a joke, shake a few hands, and then walk out those glass doors for the last time. But even in that daydream, there was a strange undercurrent. Not dread, exactly. It's just a quiet awareness that big changes, even the good ones, still feel strange when they arrive. I'd never been much for change. My father used to say I was like a rock in the river. The water goes around you, but you stay put. I guess I liked my river still. I could feel something in the air those last few weeks. Maybe it was just me getting sentimental. Maybe it was the way my boss's door seemed closed more often, or the way HR started walking past my desk with stacks of folders, never making eye contact. I told myself I was imagining it. After all, I'd given nearly 3 decades to this place. They'd send me off with a handshake and a smile, just like we'd talked about. Or at least, that's what I thought. It was a Monday morning, the kind that already felt heavy before it even began. The sky outside was that dull winter gray that makes everything look flat, like someone turned the saturation down on the world. I'd just settled at my desk, the steam from my coffee curling up in lazy spirals, when an email notification popped up in the corner of my screen. Subject: meeting today, 10 a.m. From Marianne Hughes, my boss. I stared at it for a moment. No agenda, no context. Just my name in the to field. I don't usually get called into her office unless it's something about quarterly reports or when they need me to train someone new. And she usually gives at least a little heads up. Can we chat later this week? Or let's touch base after lunch. Not this time. I glanced over at her door, just down the hall, closed, the blinds drawn. The last time she'd closed her blinds was during that messy layoff 2 years ago. I tried not to think about that. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe she wanted to get my perspective on a project before I left. Or maybe it was about the small retirement gathering. But my stomach didn't get the memo. It had already dropped into that slow, uneasy churn, like it knew something my brain refused to accept. At 9:58, I pushed back my chair and made the walk down the hall. It's funny how the walk to a boss's office can feel so much longer than it actually is. Every step echoed in my ears. My palms felt damp, so I rubbed them against my slacks, pretending it was just because the heater was on too high. When I reached her door, I hesitated for half a second, enough to take a deep breath, enough to think it's probably nothing. Then I knocked. Her voice was chipper, almost too chipper. Come in. She was sitting behind her desk, that stiff smile plastered on like she'd practiced it. The blinds were still drawn, casting the office in that weird artificial light from the overhead fluorescents, She gestured to the chair across from her. Have a seat. I sat. The leather was cold. I just wanted to check in with you, she began, her tone careful. How are things going? That threw me. It wasn't the question, it was the way she asked it, like she was feeling out the temperature of the water. Before stepping in, I gave a half shrug. Fine, just tying up a few things before, the big day. I forced a smile, but it landed awkwardly. She nodded. Yes, of course. Her hands folded on the desk, fingers lacing and unlacing. For a second, I thought she was going to say something right then. But instead she said, we'll talk more later this week. I just wanted to make sure you were doing okay, that was it. It's no specifics, no questions about projects, just that. I left her office more uneasy than when I walked in. Her smile was still stuck in my head, not warm, not genuine. It was the kind of smile you give when you're about to deliver bad news, but you're not ready to yet. I went back to my desk, sipped my now lukewarm coffee, and tried to shake it off. Feeling clung to me like static. Looking back now, I realized that was the first real warning, first ripple in the calm surface. I just didn't want to see it for what it was. It happened 2 days after that strange meeting. I was at my desk, going through some old files, making sure everything was neatly archived for whoever took over after me. The office felt unusually quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you check if you've missed an email about a fire, drill, or some all-hands meeting. Then I saw her, Mary Ann, standing in my peripheral vision. Not at my desk, not leaning in the doorway like she usually would, but standing a few feet back, her hands clasped together. Can we talk in my office? She asked. Her tone was softer than usual, almost apologetic.
I stood,
my chair scraping against the floor louder than I meant it to. The walk this time felt heavier, like each step was sinking into something I couldn't see. The blinds in her office were still drawn. She gestured to the chair again. This time, I didn't even bother to sit back fully. I stayed half-perched, like my body already knew it might need to get up quickly. She didn't waste time. Afraid I have some difficult news. My stomach turned to ice. As of today, your position is being terminated, she continued, her voice unnervingly steady. The company is undergoing restructuring, and unfortunately, your role has been impacted. I stared at her. I heard the words. I could repeat them back if I had to, but my brain refused to process their meaning. Terminated? My voice flat, mechanical. She nodded once. Your last day will be today. IT will collect your badge before you leave. It was like being punched in the chest without warning. Couldn't breathe for a second. Then the numbers started screaming. In my head, 11 days. 11 days until my retirement bonus kicked in. 11 days until the one thing I'd been counting down to for years. You're serious? I asked. It was all I could think to say, because anything else, why? How could you? After 27 years, felt like it would crack me open. Completely. Her expression flickered for a second, like she knew exactly what I was thinking. I know the timing is unfortunate. Unfortunate. The words scraped out of me sharper than I intended. That's one way to put it. Shifted in her chair, the leather creaking under her. You'll be given your standard severance package. I almost laughed. Almost because the severance was nothing compared to the bonus I was losing. They knew it. That was the whole point. My eyes went to the blinds, still drawn tight, shutting out the hallway. And it hit me she'd been preparing for this. That check-in earlier in the week, it wasn't concern. That was scouting the battlefield. I stood up slowly, because I didn't trust my voice anymore. My hands felt numb. Right, I said, forcing my lips into something resembling a smile. Well, thanks for the heads up. It wasn't thanks, it wasn't even close. But it was the only thing keeping me from saying what I really wanted. 2, in giving them the satisfaction of seeing me unravel, as I walked out of her office, the hallway felt different. Like it had stretched, the walls pulling farther apart. Every familiar detail, the framed company photos, the potted plant in the corner, looked suddenly hostile. And just like that, 27 years boiled down to a single, curt conversation. Behind closed blinds, I don't remember leaving her office. 1 second, I was standing there, my hands pressed into the arms of that cold leather chair, and the next, I was back in the hallway with my cardboard box from the supply closet, moving on autopilot. It was strange how normal everything looked. Phones still ringing, fingers still flying across keyboards, the faint hum of the copier in the corner. A week ago, those sounds had been part of my routine, my background music. Now they sounded distant, muffled. It's like I was underwater. I stopped by my desk and just stood there for a moment, staring at the small, ordinary things that had quietly become mine over the years. The stapler with the little crack in the side, the mug from the company's 10-year anniversary picnic, the photo of my wife and me at the beach. Things no one else would think twice about. But things I had touched almost every day for nearly 3 decades. I started placing them into the box. Slowly, not because I needed the time, but because moving fast felt wrong. I could feel eyes on me, not directly. No one wanted to make it obvious, but in that sideways glance way. It's a kind where someone pretends to be focused on their screen, but their typing slows, their head tilts ever so slightly. A few coworkers offered faint, tight-lipped smiles, the kind you give when you want to say something but can't, or won't. "Hey, you okay?" Mark from accounting asked quietly as he passed. I looked up at him, and for a second, I almost told him everything about the 11 days, about the bonus they didn't want to pay, about how betrayed I felt. But the words stayed stuck in my throat. Instead, I just nodded, yeah, just packing up. He hesitated, like he might say more. Then didn't. He just kept walking. I pulled my sweater from the back of my chair, folded it, and set it on top of the box. My nameplate, the one they'd given me after my first year here, was the last thing I took. I turned it over in my hands, tracing the engraved letters. Then I dropped it in with the rest. When IT showed up to take my badge, I handed it over without a word. Watching them clip it onto their lanyard felt final, like they'd just erased my existence here with a single motion. I walked toward the elevator, my box cradled against my chest. Every step away from my desk felt like another door slamming shut behind me. I didn't look back, not because I didn't want to, but because I knew if I did, I might see someone else already sliding into my chair. The elevator doors closed, and in the reflection of the brushed steel, I barely recognized the man staring back at me. Same suit, same tie. But the light in his eyes was gone, replaced with something flat, cold. 27 years. Gone in the time it takes an elevator to reach the lobby. I didn't have to tell anyone at work what happened. Word traveled faster than I could carry my box to the car by the time I sat behind the wheel. There were already 3 text messages on my phone from Julia, I just heard. "I'm so sorry. This is unbelievable." From Tom. "Man, I can't believe they'd do this to you. If you need anything, let me know. It's from an unknown number. Take care of yourself, okay?" And then it's nothing. No flood of outrage, no voices raised in the hallway. It's just a trickle of polite condolences, all sent privately, the kind of support people can give without risking their own place in the company. I couldn't really blame them. That's how it works in offices like ours. People know where the invisible lines are, and no one wants to be the next person impacted by restructuring. Still, it stung. On the drive home, I kept thinking about how many birthdays I'd missed for late-night deadlines. How many vacations I'd canceled because some urgent project came up. I'd done all that for the team. But when the time came, the team stayed silent. When I walked through the front door, the house was quiet. My wife Lisa came out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. She saw the box in my arms and froze. "What happened?" Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Just those 2 words felt like they cut me open. I set the box down on the coffee table. For a second, I couldn't speak. I just stared at the mug from my desk, the photo of us from our anniversary trip, sitting there like they didn't belong. "In our living room, they let me go," I finally said. My voice sounded strange in my own ears, flat, mechanical, her brow furrowed. "But your retirement's in a week and a half." "What about they know?" I said. "Why?" The look on her face, that mix of confusion, anger, and worry, hurt worse than anything Marianne had said in her office. Lisa sat down next to me, reaching for my hand, but I could barely look at her. I'd always thought the financial loss would be the worst part. But it wasn't. It was the humiliation. The idea of explaining to my wife, my kids, my friends, that after nearly 3 decades, the company had decided I wasn't worth even 11 more days. Later that evening, my son called. He'd heard from Lisa. "Dad, that's not right. You can fight this." Maybe I could. But right then, all I could think about was how small I felt. Like all those years I'd been building something, and in a single afternoon, someone had kicked it down without a second thought. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the silence of the house pressing in. I kept hearing Marianne's voice in my head, that practiced calm tone. "Your role has been impacted." And for the first time in years, I had no idea what tomorrow was going to look like. For the first few days, I moved through the hours like I was wading through molasses. I woke up at the same time out of habit, only to sit at the kitchen table, with my coffee, staring at the wall where the calendar used to hang. But somewhere between day 3 and day 4, the fog started to thin. Not all at once, more like light leaking slowly under a door. And with it came something I hadn't felt yet. Anger, not the hot, explosive kind that burns itself out quickly. This was colder, quieter, the kind of anger that sharpens rather than dulls you. It started when I was tossing some papers into the shredder, and my eyes landed on the thick, manila folder marked employment contract. I'd signed that thing so long ago, the ink might as well have been dry before my son was born. I wasn't even sure why I still had it, maybe out of habit, maybe out of some subconscious trust and just in case. I pulled it out, along with every addendum, every policy update they'd mailed me over the years. The stack was heavier than I expected. That night, after Lisa went to bed, I sat at the kitchen table with a yellow highlighter, flipping page after page. Most of it was legal fluff I barely understood, but then I found it. A clause buried deep in the benefits section. It read something like, "Employees eligible for retirement benefits, who are terminated without cause within 30 days of their effective retirement. Date will receive full benefits as if employment had continued until said date." I read it again and again. Without cause. They'd said restructuring, which wasn't performance related, which meant I grabbed my laptop and started digging. Emails from Marianne about my excellent contributions to the team, performance. Reviews rating me as exceeds expectations. Memos about my upcoming retirement date. By the time I shut the laptop, my pulse was steady but fast, like my body was catching on to something my brain was still processing. It wasn't proof yet. It was a crack, a small opening in the wall they'd built to shut me out. And for the first time since walking out of that building, felt something I thought I'd lost completely, the tiniest flicker of control. I slid the contract into a new folder labeled leverage and set it on the table like it was something alive. Lisa came into the kitchen, rubbing her eyes. "You're still up?" I looked at her, and for the first time all week, I didn't feel like I was bringing her bad news. "Yeah," I said, "but I think I found something." Once I saw that clause in the contract, it was like a switch flipped. The shock, the humiliation, they were still there. But now they had somewhere to go. I made a checklist that night, contract clause highlighted, recent performance reviews printed, archived emails downloaded, never been much of a folder and label. Kind of person before, but now, every piece of paper, every file, felt like a weapon I might need. The next morning, I called an employment lawyer. His voice was calm, measured, the kind of tone that told me he'd heard 100 stories like mine. When I told him about the clause, there was a pause on the other end of the line. And then he said, "Bring everything you've got." This could be significant. That word, significant, stuck with me. I spent the next 2 days digging deeper. My personal email archives, old USB drives, even the dusty boxes in the attic where I dumped company mailers years ago. I found everything from congratulatory emails about milestones to HR memos praising my decades of dedication, Every time I uncovered something, I felt the anger sharpen just a little more. I kept flashing back to moments I'd brushed off at the time, the year they asked me to cover an entire department's work because of budget cuts. The Christmas Eve when I was on a conference call while my family sat down to dinner. The weekends where just a few hours of extra work turned into 2 full days. At the time, I'd told myself it was worth it. That loyalty meant something. Now I realized it meant something only until it became expensive. Lisa started noticing the change in me. The slump in my shoulders was gone. My voice had more weight again. "You're not just letting this go, are you?" she asked one night. "No," I said, and I meant it. Meeting with the lawyer in person made everything real. We sat across a polished oak table while he flipped through my neatly organized folders. Every so often he'd make a small sound, a low hum, a muttered "interesting," and jot something down. Finally, he closed the folder and looked at me. "If what you've told me is accurate, they owe you that bonus. And given your work history, there's a case for damages." That word "damages" felt like someone had just cracked open a locked door. This wasn't just about getting back what they'd tried to take. This was about holding them accountable for every calculated move they'd made to cut me out early. Walking out of that office into the crisp winter air, I felt something I hadn't in weeks. A sense of momentum, like the ground under my feet was mine again. I wasn't just a man who got fired 11 days before his retirement bonus. I was someone with proof. And soon, they were going to see exactly what that meant. The courtroom wasn't anything like the TV dramas. No grand wood-paneled walls, no soaring ceilings, just beige walls, scuffed linoleum, and the faint hum of fluorescent lights. Still, the air felt heavy, the kind of heaviness that makes you sit a little straighter without realizing it. I sat at the plaintiff's table next to my lawyer, the folder of evidence between us like a loaded weapon. Across the aisle, the company's representatives looked almost bored. Marianne wasn't there, of course. She wasn't. They'd sent their legal team. Polished and composed, as if this was just another routine item on their calendar. When the proceedings began, I kept my eyes forward, my hands folded in my lap. My lawyer started by laying out the facts. 27 years of employment, spotless record, documented praise, a retirement date set in writing. And then the firing, just 11 days before my benefits were due. They tried to spin it as a necessary restructuring, a purely financial decision unrelated to me personally. But every time their lawyer spoke, mine countered with something concrete: an email, a memo, a performance review. And then came the clause. My lawyer read it aloud, slow and deliberate. Employees eligible for retirement benefits who are terminated without cause within 30 days of their effective retirement. Date will receive full benefits as if employment had continued until said date. He let the words hang there for a moment before adding, "This clause exists to prevent exactly what happened to my client." I watched the company's lead counsel shift in his seat just slightly. Then came the part that felt almost surreal. They had to admit, under questioning, that my termination was not for cause. They tried to soften it: strategic timing, budgetary alignment, but the truth was out. They'd done it to save money. Hearing it stated aloud in that sterile room was strange. On one hand, it was vindicating proof I hadn't been imagining things, that the betrayal was real. On the other hand, it made the whole thing feel even colder. It wasn't personal. It was calculated. I wasn't a person to them in that moment. I was a line item. When my lawyer rested our case, I felt my pulse steady for the first time in weeks. Not calm, no. There was still too much at stake, but steady. Like I'd climbed a long hill and could finally see the top. The judge took time to review the evidence. Those minutes felt like hours, the sound of shuffling papers and the ticking of a wall clock filling the silence. When the ruling came, it was clear they were in the wrong. I was entitled to my full retirement bonus, plus additional compensation for damages. I didn't smile. I didn't pump my fist. I just let out a slow breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding since the day. Marianne closed those blinds in her office. They hadn't just tried to take my money. They'd tried to erase the value of 27 years. And now, on record, they'd failed. The check came in the mail 2 weeks later. A thick envelope with my lawyer's return address, heavier than it should have been. I sat at the kitchen table, the same spot where I'd first spread out my contract under the yellow glow of the lamp, and slid my finger under the flap. It was all there, the retirement bonus they'd tried to keep from me. The damages, the legal fees, on paper, it was a win. A big one. Lisa stood behind me, her hands resting on my shoulders as I read through the breakdown. "You did it," she said softly. But the truth was, it didn't feel like winning. Don't get me wrong, the money mattered. It meant Italy was back on the table. It meant I didn't have to worry about the mortgage. But it didn't undo the image of me walking out of that building with a cardboard box. It didn't erase the silence from coworkers I thought would stand up for me. It didn't change the fact that my last day there was one they'd forced on me, behind closed blinds. Instead of the small celebration I'd pictured, the calls started coming in after the news spread. Friends, family, even a few former colleagues, who couldn't say anything at the time, but were glad justice was served. I thanked them, because that's what you do. But the words sat awkward in my mouth. One night, Mark from accounting, the same guy who'd asked me quietly if I was okay as I packed up, called me out of the blue. I wanted to speak up. He said, "But I've got 2 kids in college." I couldn't risk it. I told him I understood. I did. But it was another reminder of how quickly loyalty collapses when it's weighed against survival. The strangest part was how fast the company moved on. They didn't appeal the ruling, didn't try to negotiate. They just cut the check and closed the file, like I'd been nothing more than an item on a to-do list. One evening, Lisa and I sat on the back porch, the check in a drawer inside, the spring air carrying the faint smell of lilacs. She asked me, "So, what now?" I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that the fight was over. I'd gotten what they owed me. But somewhere along the way, I'd also learned something harder, that the place I'd given almost 3 decades to was never really mine. And maybe it never had been. A month after the case closed, I drove past the old building for the first time, not on purpose. Traffic detoured me that way. The glass facade looked the same, the revolving doors spinning, the security guard still posted out front. For a second, I thought about stopping, just to see if anyone would recognize me, but I didn't. Instead, I kept driving, the afternoon sun flashing in my side mirror. The truth is, I didn't need to walk back in there. That part of my life had already been packed away, not in the cardboard box they gave me, but in my own mind.
Oh.
It's strange how it can shrink down to a few folders of paperwork, a couple of old company mugs, and a nameplate sitting in the garage. I spent my mornings differently now. No more fighting traffic, no more break room coffee that tasted faintly of burnt toast. These days, I brewed a strong pot at home, opened the window, and listened to the neighborhood wake up, dogs barking, lawn sprinklers clicking on, a kid yelling for their backpack. I started walking again too. Not the rushed kind of walking between meetings, but the slow kind, where you actually notice the air. It's the way it smells after rain, the way the sunlight hits the trees just before dinner. Some afternoons, Lisa and I would sit on the porch and talk about the trip we'd take, not just Italy anymore, but maybe Greece too. Why not? We'd earned it. Every now and then, I'd catch myself thinking about the what-ifs. What if they hadn't fired me? What if I'd left on my own terms? But those thoughts didn't cut as deep anymore. They were just shadows. Realized something on one of those long walks. The company had taken my final days there, but they hadn't taken the years before. They couldn't touch the projects I was proud of, the people I'd helped, the mornings I'd felt useful and capable. Those belonged to me. One evening, I opened my desk drawer and pulled out the check, not to cash it, that had already been done, but to look at it one last time. Proof that I'd stood my ground, proof that they hadn't just swept me aside. Without consequence, I slid it back in, closed the drawer, and felt a quiet kind of peace settle in. That chapter was done, and for the first time in a long time, the rest of the story was mine too. Right.